Paro had a plan. You've all learned this. 6th graders learned this the most recently. Paro had a very sneaky plan, says the Ramban. Paro said, if I enslave the Jews right away, the Egyptian people will never go for it. They'll stop me because they like the Jews too much. So I have to do it in stages. Very famous Ramban. So first he said, we'll put a tax on all the Jews that they have to help build. They have to help build the pyramids and the temples and things like that. And the Jews said, sure, we're going to help. And they all helped. And then, once people started thinking about the Jews in Mitzrayim in a different way, then he secretly gave a command to the Miyaldot. And he said, can you secretly kill the boys, the boy babies, when the women are giving birth? And then they said no, and then by this time, the Ramban explains, it got to the point where in the eyes of the Egyptians, the Jews weren't even people anymore. So at that point, Paro could say, throw all the boys in the river. You remember this? You remember this story? It's a famous story, right? Hitler did a very similar thing. He first started by taking away lots of rights from the Jews in Germany and in Austria. And you've heard this too. And what we're remembering today, because 72 years ago today, we got to stage 2 or 3. This was not the beginning of Hitler's plan. But 72 years ago today was a night called Kristallnacht. That's correct. Kristall means broken glass. And 72 years ago today, because of an excuse that the Nazis found, there was a 17-year-old kid. Do you know this story? Yeah. 17-year-old kid living in Paris, and his parents had been thrown out of Germany. His parents had been thrown out of Germany because they were originally Polish citizens, and they were sent to the Polish border, and the Polish government said, well, we don't want them, because nobody really wanted the Jews at that point. And this 17-year-old kid got a telegram from his parents saying, please send us money, we're starving. They were living on like these little camps on the Polish border. And he was so upset that he bought a gun. True story. And he went to the German embassy. His name was Herschel Greenspan. And he shot one of the diplomats who worked at the German embassy. And that person then later, a day or so later, passed away from his wounds. And the Nazis said, okay, this is the opportunity we've been waiting for. Now we can start throwing the babies in the river. So I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Try this. And imagine the room that we're sitting in now, with all the stained glass windows that are back over there, and the windows here, and the glass over my head, smashed and shattered, and all the sidurim and chumashim in a big pile in the middle of the room on fire. And then I want you to imagine stores and restaurants up and down Middle Neck Road, Danny's and Tel Aviv and Gildor and Elite and all those places smashed, the windows all shattered, and everything on fire, and people being arrested. And it's very hard to imagine that. But it was very hard for the German people to imagine it in 1938, but that's exactly what happened. That's exactly, excuse me, that's exactly what happened. And we can't forget that. Whether your family comes from that part of the world, or whether your family comes from a totally different part of the world, Jews were in big, big trouble, and we can't forget that. Because Kristallnacht, many historians say, was the beginning of the end. The next step that the Nazis came up with was what they called the final solution. And they were able to take the 30,000 people that were arrested, it was mostly men, who were arrested on Kristallnacht, and they put them in concentration camps, including such places you've heard of as Bergen-Belsen. Auschwitz wasn't yet operational at that point. That's the famous one. But they put them in Dachau, they put them in Buchenwald. And a couple months later they let them out, but about 1,000 of them died. So one night everyone goes to sleep. In the middle of the night, glass starts breaking and people are being hauled out of their houses, and they walk down Middle Neck Road the next day on their way to school, and all the smoke is coming out of the broken windows of Strauss Bakery and Wheatley and maybe Tasty Delight because they serve kosher food. Imagine that in your mind, which is very hard to imagine, but that's what happened. My brother-in-law was in Berlin last week on business. Berlin is the capital of Germany. And I said, how was it? He said it was very, very creepy. Because everywhere in Berlin, he said, is a place that something happened. And he went to the Gestapo Museum and he went to the Holocaust Museum because he had time to do a little tourist stuff. And he said it was a terrible, terrible experience. Because everywhere he went, now the shuls are all rebuilt in Berlin. And now they're all monuments to what was, and we should never forget. But he said it really creeped him out. Those were his words. We cannot forget.